The grand chamber of the Galactic Concord was the largest room ever built by living hands. It sat at the very center of Station Loomis, a space station so enormous it had its own rivers, its own forests, and its own clouds that floated near the ceiling. 47 species had built it together, 300 years ago, as proof that peace was worth something. The walls were made of pale stone brought from 20 different planets. The ceiling was clear glass, and through it the stars looked cold and very far away. Today, those stars did not feel like friends. The Voreth ambassador walked to the center podium like a man who had already won. His name was Varek, the ninth, supreme voice of the Voreth hegemony, and he was nearly 3 meters tall. His scales were dark green and caught the light like wet stone. His golden eyes never blinked. He wore black armor that had no decoration on it because the Voreth did not decorate things. They did not believe in decoration. They believed in outcomes. He let the silence sit for a moment before he spoke. "The Galactic Concord," he said, his voice being translated into 47 languages at the same time, "has grown old and soft. 900 years of peace has made you weak. The Voreth hegemony did not sign the Treaty of Solace because we believed in peace. We signed it because we were patient, because we needed time, and now our time has come." Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Pressed a button on the podium. The great display screen behind him lit up. It showed 2 planets, both of them colony worlds belonging to the Ilvari, a gentle, insected species that had been part of the Concord since the beginning. 3 days ago, those planets had been green and blue, full of cities and rivers and the sounds of billions of lives being lived. Now they were black. The surface had cracked open like old clay. Long dark lines ran across both worlds like scars. There was no movement. No light, no heat signatures, nothing had survived. The sorrow weapon had touched them, and everything had stopped. From the Ilvari section of the chamber came a sound that no translator could fully capture. It was high and broken and very old. It was the sound of a people watching their dead being shown to them on a screen while the killer stood and watched. Varek did not look at them. 2,300,000,000 dead, he said, in the same flat voice a man might use to read a weather report. Consider that a demonstration. Submit to the authority of the Voreth hegemony within 30 days, or every world under conquered protection will be shown the same kindness. He stepped back from the podium and folded his large hands behind his back. That is all. Then the room broke. Species shouted over one another. The Drahari were crying, which for them looked like their fur turning white. The sulking ambassador was already sending emergency signals home. 2 delegations tried to speak at the same time and neither could be heard. The Makori elder, who was very old and had not seen war in his lifetime, sat down slowly and put his face in his hands. Panic moved through the chamber like a sickness, jumping from one table to the next. In the middle of all of it, the human delegation sat still. There were 4 people at the human table, 2 aides, a security officer named Chen, and Ambassador Serena Vale. She was a small woman, 53 years old, with short gray hair and dark eyes that missed nothing. She wore a plain blue jacket with no medals on it. She had been the human ambassador to the Concord for 11 years, and in that time she had never once raised her voice in this chamber. She was not raising it now. She was finishing her tea. She drank the last of it slowly, set the cup down without a sound, and looked across the chamber at Varek. He was already watching her, the way something large and confident watches something small and harmless. His head tilted just slightly. She smiled at him. It was not the kind of smile people give when they are happy. It was not the kind of smile people give when they are nervous. It was the kind of smile a person gives when they already know exactly how a story ends, and they are simply waiting with great patience for the last few pages to turn. She stood up. "Ambassador Vale," said the conquered speaker, Osralen, a 4-armed creature who had been running this chamber for 40 years. "This is not the moment for—" "I would like to make a formal request," Serena said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. The room began to go quiet again, one voice at a time. Under Article 7, Section 12 of the Concord Charter, the United Terran government formally requests that this body classify the current conflict as a human affairs matter and step aside. Dead silence. Then Varak laughed. It was a deep, rolling sound, like boulders knocking together at the bottom of a hill. His aides laughed. Several other species in the gallery made their own sounds of disbelief and dark amusement. Even a few Concord staff members near the back allowed themselves small smiles. It was absurd. Everyone knew it was absurd. Humans had not fought a war in 900 years. Their last military engagement was ancient history, dusty records in a library that nobody read. They had become traders, diplomats, farmers, musicians. Their greatest exports were food, medicine, and very long novels. "You," Varak said, looking at the small woman with the empty teacup, "want to handle this alone." "Yes," Serena said simply. She sat back down. More laughter, louder this time. The Vorath ambassador turned back to the Concord speaker, clearly done with the conversation. He had said what he came to say. He had showed what he came to show. Now he would wait for the begging to begin. Nobody noticed that Ambassador Vale's security officer, Chen, had quietly pressed a button on his wrist and sent a 2-word encrypted message to a receiver that was not on any Concord directory. The message said, "Clock starts." But there was one person in the chamber who had not laughed at all, not even close. Elder Ssoketh of the Ilvari sat in the far left section of the chamber. He was almost 300 years old, which made him ancient by his species measure. He had 4 compound eyes the color of copper, and right now all 4 of them were fixed on Serena Vale. He was not thinking about the dead colonies. He was not thinking about the Vorath. He was thinking about something he had read 60 years ago, in a library on a small Earth University campus, where he had spent a decade studying human history. Not the recent history, not the peaceful centuries of trade routes and council meetings and cultural exchanges. The old history, the kind from before the Treaty of Solace, the kind with numbers in it that still gave him trouble sleeping. He leaned over to his young aide and spoke in the lowest whisper he could manage, in their own native language, so no translator would catch it. "Send a private message," he said, "to every Ilvari civilian settlement within 4 star systems of human space." The aide blinked her lower eyes. "What should it say, Elder?" Ssoketh watched Serena Vale pour herself another cup of tea with a completely steady hand. "2 words," he said quietly. "Just leave. Do not explain, do not wait, just leave." The galaxy had made an assumption about humans, and it had made it so long ago that nobody even thought of it as an assumption anymore. It had simply become accepted truth, the kind that nobody checks because it has never needed checking. The assumption was this: 900 years of peace had made humans gentle. The Sol Defense Directorate was built inside an asteroid, not near an asteroid, not beside one, inside one. It had been hollowed out over 2 centuries, deep in the outer belt of the solar system, far enough from Earth that civilian ships had no reason to pass near it, and far enough from the major trade lanes that no foreign sensor array had ever given it a second look. From the outside, it looked like an unremarkable rock floating in unremarkable dark. From the inside, it was a city. Admiral Dren Kalos had worked inside this rock for 30 years. He was 61 years old, broad-shouldered, with a completely shaved head and the kind of calm face that came not from peace but from having made enough hard decisions that the hard ones no longer shook him. He was drinking coffee when the message came in. He looked at it once. He set his coffee down. He walked to the main command floor without hurrying, because hurrying would have felt wrong for what this was. He pressed his palm to the activation panel. The panel asked for a voice confirmation. He gave it. Then it asked for a second confirmation from the officer beside him, Commander Reyes, who gave hers. Then it asked for the date and the authority code from Command Earth. That came in 6 seconds later. Then the lights on the main board changed from white to red. Not the emergency red of crisis. A different red. A deep, practiced, almost ceremonial red. The color that the board turned when it was not a drill. The board had turned this color exactly once before in recorded history, and that was 902 years ago. Every person on the command floor stood up without being told, not from fear, from something else, something older. "Begin activation of the Ironville network," Admiral Kalos said. The officer at the far console, a young woman named Petty Officer Danso, who had run this drill 400 times and never once believed she would run it for real, entered the sequence with hands that were completely steady. It took her 11 seconds. Across human space, in the dark between stars, in the deep cold of asteroid fields and the shadow sides of moons, and the empty corridors of space that no foreign ship had ever been invited into, 3,000 gun platforms woke up. They had been sleeping for decades, fed only the minimum power needed to keep them warm and ready, maintained by automated systems and silent inspection drones. They had never fired in anger. They had been built for one reason, and one reason only, for the day someone made the mistake the Vorath had just made. Their targeting arrays came online. Their power cores reached operational temperature. Their guns turned slowly, like the heads of things waking from a very long sleep. 3,000 platforms, all at once, across a corridor of space that stretched for 200 light-years. The Vorath patrol fleet sitting at the edge of human space had 12 ships. Good ships, modern ships, crewed by soldiers who were experienced and unafraid. Their commander, a decorated officer named Subpraetor Ven, had been ordered to sit at the border as a show of strength while the ultimatum played out. When the Ironville network activated, all 3,000 platform signatures appeared on his sensor board at the same time. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he sent a message back to Vorath Command. It was not a proud message. It was not the message of a decorated officer comfortable in his strength. It was 5 words, and his voice on the recording did not sound steady. "There is something out here." Back in the asteroid, Admiral Kalos looked at the tactical display showing the full spread of the Ironville network lighting up across the map. Then he brought up the next file. The sleeper fleets. 14 armadas sitting in deep space, cold and dark and patient, crewed by AI caretakers who had been turning on the engines every year, running the systems, keeping everything warm. Waiting. "Begin fleet recall," he said. 72 hours. That was all it would take. He looked at the last file on his desk, a black folder, physical paper, which in this age was its own kind of statement. On the front, in plain type, it said, "Project Pale Horse, to be opened upon declaration of existential conflict only." He did not open it yet. He set it to one side of his desk where he could see it. He picked up his coffee. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. The Vorath had a word for what they believed war was. Loosely translated, it meant beautiful argument. In their culture, war had structure. There were formations, there were honor codes, there were defined windows for negotiation and ceasefire. You attacked supply lines sometimes, but you did not starve armies. You hit military targets, but civilian infrastructure was left alone unless the battle absolutely required otherwise. There were rules. Even the Vorath, brutal as they were, fought by rules. They expected everyone else to fight by rules too. They were wrong. Admiral Dren Kalos activated the sleeper fleet 68 hours after the recall order, 4 hours ahead of schedule. 14 armadas dropped out of cold storage and began moving. They did not move toward the Vorath fleet. They moved toward Vorath supply lines. Not the military ones, the food ones. A civilization at war still needs to eat. It still needs raw materials shipped from mining colonies, medicine moved from production worlds, fuel carried from refineries. The Vorath military machine ran on a web of supply routes that stretched across 12 star systems, and almost none of those routes were protected by warships. because no enemy in 900 years had ever bothered to hit them. Within 2 weeks, those routes were gone, not destroyed, disrupted. Ships were intercepted and held. Relay stations were disabled. Jump points were blocked with fields of smart mines that could not be safely swept without specialist equipment the Voreth had never bothered to build. An army that cannot feed itself cannot fight. An army that cannot refuel its ships cannot move. Kalos did not want to win battles. He wanted to make battles unnecessary. While the hammer fell on the supply chains, the ghost was already inside the walls. Commander Yui Tanaka was 38 years old and looked, at first glance, like someone who worked in a university. She was thin, soft-spoken, wore her dark hair pulled back, and had a habit of looking slightly past the person she was talking to, as if she was reading something in the middle distance. She commanded a special operations unit called Pale Company, and in the first 3 weeks of the war, Pale Company did not fire a single conventional weapon. They fired code instead. Voreth warships began to behave strangely. Navigation systems routed battle cruisers toward asteroid fields. Weapons systems fired on friendly vessels at critical moments. 3 entire battle groups received orders that appeared to come directly from Voreth High Command, false orders, written in perfect Voreth command language by a human linguistics AI that had been studying Voreth communication patterns for 60 years. Telling them to retreat and regroup at coordinates that did not exist in useful space. The Voreth could not figure out what was happening. Their ships were not being destroyed. They were being made useless, confused, sent in circles. It was the kind of warfare that was very hard to explain to a high command that expected clear enemy formations and honest battle lines. And while the hammer fell and the ghost moved, Ambassador Serena Vale was disassembling the Voreth's political alliances one piece at a time. The Voreth had 3 client species, smaller civilizations who had been pressured into supporting the hegemony over the past 2 centuries. These species were not happy about their arrangement. They had simply believed they had no choice. Serena spent 2 weeks meeting privately with each of their ambassadors. She did not threaten them. She did not bribe them. She showed them documents. Voreth internal communications, captured over decades by human intelligence, translated and organized into a simple, clear picture. What the Voreth planned to do with their client species once the war was over. It was not a good picture. All 3 species formally withdrew their support from the Voreth hegemony within 30 days. In the middle of all this, a Voreth general named Prekul captured a human soldier behind enemy lines. Her name was Corporal Marin Solis. She was 26 years old and had been cut off from her unit during a covert extraction. She sat across from Prekul in an interrogation room and looked him in the eyes without looking away. Prekul waited for fear. He did not get it. "You are losing," he told her. "Okay," she said. He leaned forward. "Do you understand what the hegemony will do to your worlds if you do not stop?" Marin was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that Prekul would think about for the rest of his life. "General," she said quietly, "we didn't want this war. Humans went 900 years without one because we knew what we would have to become again if we fought one. We hoped nobody would ever make us, but you did." She tilted her head. "I'm not scared of you. I'm a little sad, honestly, because now we have to finish it." Prekul had no answer for that. 11 minutes later, Marin Solis was gone. The cell lock had been quietly bypassed by a remote signal that nobody could trace. 2 days after that, Prekul's flagship went dark. Life support intact, crew unharmed, but every weapons system, every engine, every communication array cold and dead and silent as a tomb. It drifted for a week before a Voreth rescue crew found it. Nobody ever explained how it happened. There are moments in history that change everything that comes after them. Most of the time, those moments are loud. Explosions, speeches, armies marching, crowds screaming. History remembers the noise. But sometimes the most important moment is a silence. The Ilvari Prime was the oldest Ilvari world. It was not their capital, but it was the world their people considered their heart. They had lived on it for 3,000 years. It had mountains so old they had worn down to soft hills. It had rivers that had been running for longer than most species had existed. It had cities built from pale yellow stone that the Ilvari had quarried from their own hills, generation after generation, and stacked into buildings that were not grand or tall but were strong and warm and filled with the smell of things growing. The Voreth used the Sorrow weapon on it on a Tuesday. Nobody knew it was coming. There were no fleet movements beforehand, no demand, no ultimatum. A single Voreth vessel broke from a dust cloud near the outer system, fired once, and was gone before any defense system could respond. It took 4 hours for the weapon to complete its work. 2,300,000,000 Ilvari were gone by the time the last crack closed. The broadcast from Voreth High Command came 12 minutes later. It was addressed to the conquered, to humanity, and to anyone else listening. It was short. It said that this was what resistance cost. It said that the Voreth were patient, but not indefinitely. It said that the next target had already been chosen. In the conquered emergency session that followed, species shouted and wept and demanded and pleaded. The chamber was full of noise and pain and fear. The human delegation was not there. Ambassador Serena Vale had walked out of the chamber 11 minutes before the session began. Not quickly, not with visible anger. She had simply stood, straightened her jacket, and walked out. Both aides went with her. The security officer went last, and as he passed the door, he sent one message. 2 words again, different ones this time. Open it. Inside the asteroid, Admiral Kalos received the message. He picked up the black folder. He opened it. He read for 6 minutes. Then he put the folder down, picked up his coffee, cold again, and called a single name across the command floor. Get me the Lazarus. The UTS Lazarus was not a warship by any normal measure. It was not large. It had no visible weapons. It had no fighter bay. It had no armor that showed up on conventional scans. To every sensor array in the galaxy, it looked like a survey vessel, the kind used for mapping dead planets and measuring gas clouds. It had been registered as such for 40 years. It had a crew of 12, all of them with quiet, unremarkable service records. Nobody outside of a very small group of people knew what the Lazarus actually was. Left human space alone. No escort, no fleet support, no weapons charging. It moved at a calm, steady speed toward the Voreth core systems, which were 12 days of travel away. The Voreth had eyes everywhere by now, and they saw it coming long before it arrived. They sent challenges. The Lazarus did not respond. They sent intercept ships. The ships arrived at the projected position of the Lazarus and found nothing there, not because it had fled, but because the Lazarus was already past them. As it moved through the outer Voreth systems, those systems went quiet. One at a time, not destroyed, not burning, just silent. Communication arrays stopped transmitting. Fleet command centers stopped receiving. Ships found that their engines gave them no response, their weapons returned no power, their screens showed nothing. Every system the Lazarus passed turned into a held breath. The Voreth Supreme Fleet, the largest gathering of military ships in the known galaxy, moved to block it at the edge of the core systems. 400 warships, every gun charged, every targeting array locked on the single small vessel that had come alone out of the dark. The Lazarus did not stop. The Supreme Fleet found very suddenly that it could not fire, could not move, could not speak. The Lazarus docked at the Voreth throne station without being given permission. One officer walked off it, carrying nothing, and walked through corridors that were completely empty, not because the Voreth had fled, but because they had simply stepped aside. He walked to the chamber of the Supreme Chancellor, entered alone, and closed the door. 47 minutes later, he walked back out. He said nothing to anyone he passed. The Lazarus left Throne Station the same way it arrived. 18 minutes after it was gone, the Vorath hegemony began broadcasting an unconditional surrender on every frequency it had. The Supreme Chancellor's voice was flat and very controlled, the voice of someone who has decided that the most important thing now is to say the words quickly and clearly and get them out before they change their mind. Nobody outside that room ever learned what had been said in 47 minutes. The human officer who had walked in and walked out gave one debrief, marked highest classification, and that document was sealed for 200 years. Elder Soketh watched the surrender broadcast from a medical bay where he had been resting. His aide sat beside him, silent for a long time. Then the aide asked, very quietly, "Elder, what did humans show them in that room?" Soketh was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," he said, "but I know that 900 years ago, before the Treaty of Solace, humanity fought the last great war. I know what they were willing to do in that war. I know what weapons they had then." He paused. "And I know they have not been standing still since." He closed his eyes. "Whatever was in that room," he said, "the Vorath believed it. That is enough." The war lasted 61 days. 61 days, from the moment Varak IX stood at the conquered podium and declared the end of peace, to the moment the Vorath Supreme Chancellor spoke the words of surrender into a dead and silent broadcast. 61 days. The Drahari War, 400 years ago, had lasted 19 years. The Sulking expansion before that had lasted 30. Wars between galactic powers were supposed to last decades, to grind slowly forward like glaciers, to cost generations. 61 days. The Treaty of Pale Skis was signed in the same grand chamber where it had all begun. The Vorath sent 3 representatives. They signed without speaking. The hegemony's military was to be dissolved, its warships surrendered to the conquered. Its occupied territories were freed. Reparations to the Ilvari survivors, there were not many survivors, would be paid every year for the next 200 years. The terms were not cruel. They were simply complete. There was no room in them for argument or delay or slow compliance. The Vorath signed. Ambassador Serena Vale sat at the human table and watched them sign. She did not smile this time. She simply watched with the same still face she had worn through all 61 days, through every briefing and every report and every sleepless night in her office where she had read updates and made decisions, and thought carefully about what came next. When it was done, she poured a glass of water and drank it. The conquered filed a formal inquiry into human military capabilities. It was a polite inquiry, carefully worded, asking human space to submit a full accounting of its defense assets so that the conquered could update its records. Serena received it. She read it carefully. She had her office prepare a response. The response was 10,000 pages long, documented every program and asset in complete technical detail, referenced the exact conquered charter provisions that made all of it legal, and was utterly, perfectly, completely overwhelming. Nobody read all 10,000 pages. The few who tried came away with the same feeling, not anger, not outrage, but a very specific variety of quiet unease. The feeling of realizing the person sitting across from you at dinner has been paying very careful attention to every word you have said for the last 900 years. No restrictions were proposed. No motions were filed. Nobody wanted to be the delegate who officially suggested that humanity should have less of whatever it had shown the Vorath in that room. Life began carefully to return to normal. Admiral Dren Kalos retired 6 weeks after the surrender. He put in his papers on a Thursday morning, was processed out by Friday, and was sitting on a hillside outside of Wellington by the following Tuesday. The hillside had long grass and a view of a small valley, and in the evenings his grandchildren came out to chase fireflies in the blue dusk. He was sitting there one evening when a young Ilvari diplomat came and sat beside him. Her name was Velsai. She had come to Earth as part of the first Ilvari cultural delegation since the war, a mission of connection and grief and careful rebuilding. She had asked to meet the Admiral. He had said yes. They sat for a while in the quiet. "Were you afraid," she asked him finally, "at any point during the war?" He thought about it. He took his time, which she appreciated, because it meant the answer would be honest. "Yes," he said. She turned to look at him. "Afraid we would have to stop," he said, "before it was finished. Afraid something political would get in the way. Afraid someone would negotiate and leave something undone." He watched a firefly drift past his knee. "We built all of it, trained for all of it, maintained it for 900 years, all of it running quietly in the dark, and the whole time we were hopping, genuinely hopping, that we would never have to use it." He paused. "Because we knew what it meant to use it. We knew what it would make us again." Velse was quiet for a moment. Around them, the fireflies moved through the grass like small cold stars. "What was the frightening part?" she asked softly. He looked at his grandchildren. They were running in circles and laughing at nothing, the way children did, burning energy the way fire burns because it simply can. "How easy it was to remember," he said. They sat in the quiet after that for a long time, and neither of them needed to say anything else. 3 weeks later, on the other side of the galaxy, the ruins of the Voreth hegemony were already producing something new. A faction. Young officers, angry nobles, citizens who had lost family in the 61 days and had decided the problem was not that the hegemony had started a war, but that it had not started it properly. They had a name and a symbol and a growing list of followers, and they spoke, in private rooms and encrypted channels, about pride and patience and the right kind of revenge. Intelligence reports landed on Ambassador Serena Vale's desk on a Wednesday morning. She read them over breakfast, all 12 pages, marking 3 specific names and 2 specific locations with a light pen. She set the pages down. She looked out the window at the station's false sky, calm and blue and painted perfectly. She smiled, the same smile as before, the one that meant she already knew how the story ended. She picked up her secure line and dialed a 4-digit number that connected to exactly one person. "Admiral Kalos," she said when the line picked up, "I'm sorry to interrupt your retirement." A short pause. "No, you're not," he said. She smiled wider. "No," she said, "I'm not." In a dry dock at the edge of human space, running on minimal power and attended by its silent AI caretakers, the UTS Lazarus hummed quietly in the dark. It was already being refueled.